Now, what we're doing in this section is we're talking about the United Nations. So I put a blog post up a little bit about peacekeeping, both on the military side, but also the police as well, and how effective that's been. A lot of people don't realise that there's actually police officers, male and female, are serving as blue berets around the world. And a couple of the films that I've put up some sort of documentary media stuff, so film, photography, audio, and new media. And what's been quite interesting, there's a film on there with the voices of female police officers from different places around the world that are serving in different places around the world, and the impact that that's really having on women, particularly those that have been affected by rape and sort of sexual violence, in actually being able to report that because it's a woman that they're speaking to, not just a police officer who's male. I thought that was quite interesting. And I just really wanted to see where that kind of blue helmet, blue beret kind of concept fits in with the old SDG 16 moving forward with sort of, peace and justice and things like that. So really, could we just start with a little bit about, what it is that you do at De Montfort University and what DMU is going to be doing regarding SDG 16 going forward, particularly with its sort of global lead now?
Okay, thanks, John. So I'm Associate Director of Public Engagement at De Montfort University, and that means I look after a lot of the public-facing work the university does. I should say I don't look after all of it. I think our staff and students are incredibly forward-looking. So it's quite a large remit, but I do look after DMU Local, which is a programme of activity based around research, teaching activity and general volunteering, which seeks to benefit the city of Leicester, and we do some work in the county as well. So that's a huge chunk of my work. I also look after the United Nations Academic Impact Global Hub for SDG 16. For the people who don't know what SDG 16 is, it's peace, justice and strong institutions. It's got around 20 indicators about that we should be working towards between now and 2030. And really, to sum up SDG 16, it's I like to describe it as the great enabler. So if you want to achieve other SDGs like SDG 1, no poverty, or SDG 2, zero hunger, or SDG 4, quality education, you need to have peaceful communities, and you need to have just communities where the rule of law is strong. So if the other 16 SDGs are to be achieved, it really relies on SDG 16 being enacted globally. And if I can mention a C word, the coronavirus.
That was a question I had. You've stolen my thunder.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, cool.
If you've got a specific question about that, I can leave it to that. But
no, it's gone. Fire away.
What we're seeing now is globally the most fragile communities around the world, particularly. So I could mention Syria and Yemen immediately. Conflict-torn countries, very poor infrastructure, very poor resilience as a result of war. They are going to suffer greatly if coronavirus takes hold in those countries. The only positive at the moment is that the virus has not hit many of the conflicted and fragile regions in the world, but there's a grim picture if it does, and that's simply because the governments out there aren't strong. The infrastructure has been battered by war. Most people live in poverty, and all of these factors combined make it very difficult to beat a virus in the nature that we're seeing in the current pandemic.
What kind of impact do you think? I mean, my sort of COVID-19 question was very much related to one of the things that people have been talking about with the virus and stuff is how it's set back lots of progress that's been made towards the SDGs. How does that kind of impact specifically on 16? And is that something that you're looking at regarding any kind of research using any of the academics, or is it something that's in the pipeline that you want to do maybe sort of post everything kind of going back to whatever the new normal is, then you can look back?
Yeah, well, I think fundamentally there's a current shift at the moment into researching the here and now. Certainly that's what's dominating my day job at the moment, is how we, two things really. It's how we understand what's happening to our communities locally and globally in the short term to support everyone through this crisis, and that support is the breadth of that need is as far as your brain would allow you to imagine. And then there's the long-term impact. So if we look at it in an economic measure, some economists are already discussing this will be a 7-year, not cycle, it's not the right word, but it's going to take us around 7 years to work through the impacts of what's happening now. And we need to currently have a strong research infrastructure in place to perhaps predict what the best way of coming back out of this crisis is, and perhaps how we can rethink and do things better. And because there's an opportunity here around if we talk about this discussions about conflict, there was a real opportunity for a global ceasefire, which hasn't been taken up, which is really unfortunate, really sad. Unfortunate is a very soft word, actually. It's written, but I don't know how I could describe it with cleanly. But on the other hand, lots of nations focused and have worked together to try and beat this pandemic, which is positive. So there may be some pluses that can be taken from that. And when I talk about opportunity, there are certain traditional ways of doing things potentially would be decimated to the point where we need to think how we do things in future, but what can we do? So it's like it's a blank canvas. When we rebuild the infrastructure of our cities and our communities, can we rebuild them better? Can we try and cling on to some of the benefits of this pandemic? So when if people immediately question, well, what possible benefits are there? There are significant benefits in carbon reduction, for example. I think we're all enjoying cleaner air in Leicester to record levels. And when we come out of this, how do we work to maintain that level of air quality? There is a conflict to that, or a tension in that potentially as people go back to work and industry starts to move forward again, one of the first things that might go out of the window is environmental concerns over profit in terms of how an organisation pursues its own sustainability. So typically, but what we have learned, and there's a lot of evidence around, if you invest in green things, they tend to be more sustainable and cheaper to run and good for the environment. So it's just whether that level of investment will be there after this pandemic.
Can I just touch
to pull it back to your original?
Yeah,
Sorry.
No, not far away. Keep going.
Yeah, I was going to say, to pull it back to your original question about what am I currently doing with the United Nations Academic Impact in New York. I'm really looking at trying to set an example of what we're doing, and seeing if our approach to researching the here and now with a view to coming back better and stronger, and coming up with some fairly radical ideas along the way about how society could or may operate in the future, trying to have that as a template to support others in their approaches to how they respond to the pandemic academically. That's not to say I have all the answers. I haven't, but I think that the feeling amongst the 17 global hubs for the SDGs is, if we come up with these ideas, we can share them and learn from each other, and eventually we'll get the right model. So we're all currently working on different aspects of the COVID crisis, and we've got a meeting in the middle of June to sort of like update our progress on where we are with our specific aims. And actually, I should mention one of the bonuses of this pandemic, and I know it's weird to talk about it in a positive, but historically we would potentially have all flown to New York to have this discussion. Now this form of communication is now a way of life that we can instantly all make ourselves available to be in this global conversation without leaving our homes. And I think that's a really positive thing, not only in terms of environmental impact, but actually it's just very easy to do that. I have to say it's not very easy for, I think, the people who were joining the call from Japan, because I think they got up at 4 a.m. and then someone else. I was all right, it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but then somebody in New York, it was a little bit earlier, and then there was someone else, it was 11 o'clock at night, so that was quite interesting. Luckily we're only 5 hours ahead of New York, so it's always based around New York time, so kind of quite lucky in that respect.
Yeah, maybe one of the positives out of all of this will be the conversation about daylight saving time and British summertime, and maybe time zones. That'd be quite handy, wouldn't it? Particularly for your Japanese colleagues. Yeah, let's touch on a little bit about the United Nations in a broader sense, because I've always been quite positive about it. I've known quite a few people that have served in the military as Blue Berets, both Cyprus. Also an Australian colleague of mine did quite a lot of stuff in the Bekaa Valley and stuff. One of my colleagues as well in Sudan and other places in Africa. And I think it's very easy to think about the United Nations, and a bit like we do about the EU, you know what I mean? It makes lots of rules, it kind of interferes, it seems to be quite, ineffective. Just when you think logically they'd come up with a sanction or a vote to kind of demonise someone, they don't, and then next thing you know, you start learning about the sanctions against Iraq and the impact it had on children and hospitals and stuff. And it's really easy to be negative about it until you start educating yourself and understanding a little bit about how many people are fed through the World Food Programme, the amount of stuff that it does. And doing the blue sort of helmets and berets investigation, is that nearly 1 million people, male and female, have served since 1948 in some kind of capacity in order to help those sort of situations where they go in, sometimes with a thankless task. And it's, I'll be talking to Kim Sadik tomorrow about, Srebrenica and the role of the Dutch forces. We talk about also, the Belgians when it comes to Rwanda, leaving Rwanda. So there have been some sort of epic failures, which obviously we need to learn from. But ultimately, they're making quite a lot of progress and maybe asking these questions. Is it one of those things that they'll never be thanked for because they always seem to be getting it wrong, and there's so much, and when it's good, they don't celebrate it. But for me, I think it's about remembering why it started and where it came from, particularly with sort of VE Day next Friday, where the United Nations came from and what gave birth to it, what happened to give birth to it, to the point where anywhere to get everybody round the table to talk about stuff, it's got to be a positive, hasn't it?
Yeah, I definitely I pick up on your comment about it being a thankless task. It's like any governing body, and it's pleasing all of the people all of the time is simply not going to happen. One of the benefit. I'm not by no means a spokesman for the UN in any capacity. In fact, I read an article about how it was healthy for member states to criticise the United Nations and its member states in the spirit of democratic discussion, which and how things will never improve if we just accept that this is the way things are. So from that respect, I haven't got any real axe to grind about who's made which right decisions in the past, but if you row it back to the SDGs and their creation just prior to 2015, that was a unilateral agreement, between all 93 member states agreeing on a policy for how we best make the world a more sustainable place. So that piece of work alone is incredible, an incredible thing, really, to get 93 member states to agree on the same thing. And there's some pretty hefty policies in there, in the framework, so that's really something to be treasured, really. And also, going back to why the United Nations was formed, as you mentioned, I mean, one of the most incredible things has been the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That's been an absolutely remarkable template for the world to follow, and something that has really guided how some of the big decisions that have been made by the United Nations in its what will be its 75-year history. So there is there's a potential to criticise a lot of things, but I would argue that the things for the greater good have far outweighed the negative things that have happened. In terms of peacekeeping, I think that this is a remarkable role that our planet is lucky to have, really, that this became an established piece of work for the United Nations, and the peacekeepers work in all kinds of incredible environments. I actually spent a week in Cyprus with peacekeepers from the UN. This was a long time ago, actually, 20 years ago, when the conflict between Cyprus and Turkey it was fresh in people's memories, although it was 1974, I believe, that it was all over. And I was possibly there in 1994. But the peacekeepers were still patrolling a line between northern Cyprus and the mainland Cyprus. So I was really privileged to do that, and we were under gunfire, so I can boast to my friends in a pub that I've been shot at without actually being in the army. So they're just they're grace under fire, and the work that they do is absolutely incredible, and their ability to go into areas as a recognised impartial force as well. I think that's really important.
Yeah. I
think that are they recognised enough for the work that they do? Probably not.
No.
And I think absolutely not. I'd say that. But when things go wrong, and they do go wrong when they're undertaking work of such significance, then that does make the headlines. People do like to wade in, but again, I think it's something that the planet's lucky to have, really.
Yeah. and over 3,000 of them have played the ultimate sacrifice of laying down their lives as well. So I mean, we kind of need to recognise some of that. So I've kind of put that into the blog post as well. So the final point that I want to discuss with you really is that over the last couple of years, talking to the students at De Montfort University, one of the things that very often comes up is, 17 goals, there's too many. And so I always defend it from the point of view that there were 8 Millennium Development Goals, and I'd like to think that there were that many more added for the next 15 years based on the fact that it was being able to broaden it out. And the way I describe it was the Millennium Development Goals was very much about the world and what the world can do, whereas the Sustainable Development Goals is about what we can do as well, to kind of some sort of aspirational and personal challenges for people as well to change their life. And maybe that'd be one of the positives that come out of the whole pandemic, is the fact that we need to be a lot more engaging and caring about people, and maybe check our privilege as well about what we think is harsh situations when it comes to lockdown. We're not being under shell fire, for example. We're not, the internet's still working, so I can talk to you. You can go and make a cup of tea and flush the toilet, that kind of stuff. But talking to 16 other universities that are sort of global leads as well, like De Montfort University is for SDG 16, you must get a real sense of whether 17's enough or whether it's not enough. How does what's your take on that when you speak to these other people? Is there enough in each SDG for there to warrant a global hub?
I'd love to meet these students who say that 17 is too many. I have to say, I think that the framework of the SDGs is an incredibly clever thing, in that one single SDG interacts with typically 6 or 7 of the SDGs in order to operate. So when you're working towards one SDG, you're probably working towards 7 SDGs at the same time, and each SDG, and I encourage people to, in this lockdown, while you've got a little bit more time on your hands, say, to actually go to visit the UN's SDG website and just click into the individual SDGs and see what target and indicators there are for each one. It really is a grand plan. And what's quite interesting is that the biggest global challenge is the displacement of people, and the word refugees isn't mentioned in the SDGs once. And I always find that incredible, but I also know that if we achieved if we achieved the SDGs, then we would be able to reduce the incidence of people being displaced. And if we were successful in SDG 16, we would fewer people would be displaced as a result of conflict, for example. If we were successful in SDG 13, fewer people would be displaced because of climate change. And even some of the probably going to say the wrong one now, but SDG 8, so I think like city infrastructures, if they were stronger, fewer people would be displaced as a result of having no access to quality work and employment and things like that. So this really shows that lots of the grand global challenges could be met in a variety of ways, and I think 17 is a lot. Yeah, it's a lot to understand and get your head around. But if you focus on one SDG, champion one SDG, like we're doing at De Montfort University, then we can have impacts across several different areas of global development.
So it's almost like picking one and using that as your gateway into then using or working alongside or cherry picking, for want of a better term, the ones that kind of fit well with the project that you're doing, rather than trying to do all 17. It's about almost like picking one and doing it well, and then identifying the 2 or 3 that are associated with it.
Yeah, and there's a real understanding. So I think if you're going to choose an SDG and to champion, and lots of people do immediately look at very tangible things like no poverty, or quality education, or zero hunger, so that they're in the first 4 SDGs on the list, and they're very easy to comprehend. But when you actually then try to champion, well, I want to create a world with zero poverty, you immediately have to understand that in order to do that, you need a strong infrastructure in your city, lots of good jobs that people can get to, lots of quality education, a real lack of people dropping bombs on your city, or a real reduction in corruption, a need for different organisations to work together. So you suddenly start seeing that actually it's not all about SDG 1, it's about SDG 4, and it's about SDG 8, and it's about SDG 16, and it's about SDG 17, and then so yeah, it's a really, really good entry point, and you'll find that if you can't get very far without trying to enable some of the other SDGs for any kind of success or impact. So if somebody could wrap that all up in 1 or 2 SDGs, that would be great. Yeah. But I think all you would be doing is taking a shift. Yeah. You would just be piling an entire unworkable focus into 1 or 2, because you could say, well, let's focus on SDG 1 and SDG 2, and the world will be a better place. But that would only involve the other 17 SDGs being rolled into those the indicators and targets. So I think they're broken down quite well, actually.
I often look at it like the if you look at it from a macro point of view, it's like, how can I solve world hunger, or how can I solve climate the change? Plastic in the ocean. Well, you can't on that scale. But the SDGs almost like breaks it down into a series of micro actions that all of us can take that connected together. I always use that terminology. The grass is never greener on the other side. So water the grass you stand on, and then hook up with other people that have watered their own grass. The next thing you know, you've got a lawn. And I think the SDGs are very much like that. So I see them as aspirational, but also quite tangible in giving some actions that you can take in order to move it forward. Okay. So just sum up for me finally. What you think is going to happen in the next sort of 12, 18 months, 2 years at the university when it comes to your leadership role with SDG 16. We've got a few minutes left.
Well, one of the main things I really want to do is to really promote the idea of the Sustainable Development Goals through the lens of SDG 16. So I'm going to be doing big pieces of work around promoting the idea, getting students engaged in the idea. I'm working with the Centre of Academic Innovation to start introducing modules which have SDG focuses on them as part of service learning and volunteering experiences. So students can get first-hand, do things in their study that have first-hand impacts locally in Leicester and surrounding area, which actually start to meet some of the targets. So there's something that you were leading nicely into around there's a real importance to act locally, think globally on this stuff. So what can I do as an individual to stop plastic ending up in the ocean? Because if everyone stopped discarding plastic into our waterways and using plastic unnecessarily, then the difference would be immense. So there are things you can do. It just feels a little helpless at times. So I'm going to be doing a huge piece of work around really promoting what people can do as individuals and linking it back to their degree learning.
Excellent. Okay, that's good. Well, thanks very much for taking some time to talk to us, mate. I appreciate that. And hopefully the Dot Media Centre can support the work that you're doing forward, particularly around that kind of solutions journalism, which is not just, this is the problem, here's the solution, but maybe some of the understanding as well. And I think people are really up for one of the things that could come out of this COVID-19 situation is that people turn around and say, well, actually, yeah, I was interested in that. How do I carry on being interested in that in order to make a bit of an impact? I'm going to put all your links and stuff to the website into the blog post as well. And if I've got any questions that come through, I can send them on to you. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
For the official response.
Yeah. Thank you for the ongoing support of the Documentary Media Centre, because the freedom of speech is a really important part of SDG 16. So we're very lucky to have this in Leicester and as a focal point of how we promote media in the city. So very grateful for that, John. So
no worries.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, thank you very much, mate. All the best. Enjoy your weekend, yeah?
Great. Thank you very much.
See you then. Bye.
Bye for now.